In the chapter previous to this morning's gospel reading, the risen Christ has been offering hope and healing to his disciples, relentlessly pursuing them with his trademark unconditional love that embraces them just where they are, right in the midst of their flaws, their shortcomings, and their messy grief. He approached Mary Magdalene while she was weeping outside the tomb, offering her a bit of comfort and relief when he tenderly spoke her name. He encountered some of the disciples huddled in fear behind locked doors, and he breathed a word of peace upon them. He tracked down Thomas, who had been scouring the streets looking for him, and he invited Thomas to touch his woundedness. And in this morning's encounter, he meets Peter. It's an encounter that takes place beside a charcoal fire, which would have called to mind another charcoal fire not so long ago, that one in the courtyard of the high priest. Jesus had been seized by the authorities, and he was inside being interrogated for insurrection against the Roman Empire. On that fateful night, Peter had been trying to warm himself at the courtyard charcoal fire, doing his best to blend into the scenery, hoping that no one would recognize him. But as luck would have it, a woman called out to him saying, "Aren't you one of this man's disciples?" Excuse me. And out of fear for his life, he denied it, saying, "I am not." He should have made his escape right then and there. But something compelled him to stay. And when others approached him asking if he was one of Jesus' disciples, again he replied, "I am not." And finally, when a slave of the high priest asked, "Hey, aren't you the one who cut off my cousin's ear in the garden where this accused man was taken?" For the third time, Peter denied his relationship with Jesus. And as if in a desperate effort to erase the guilt, grief, and nightmarish terror of that night and the following day, indeed in an attempt to erase his entire 3-year relationship with Jesus, Peter decided to go fishing, returning to what he did before he ever met this holy man who had upended his life. But the risen Christ pursued him just as relentlessly as he did the others. And I imagine him pulling Peter off to the side, away from the inquisitive ears of the others, and saying, "Do you love me, Peter?" And Peter, hoping that Jesus is willing to let bygones be bygones, says, "You betcha, Jesus." To which Jesus curiously replies, "To this fisherman by trade, then become a shepherd and feed my lambs." And so it was 3 times that he asked Peter if Peter loved him, each time receiving the response, yes, and each time Jesus replying, "Then be a shepherd to my flock." You see, Jesus and Peter couldn't just pick up as if nothing had ever happened. They couldn't move forward pretending that Peter hadn't denied a relationship with Jesus. And so Jesus, out of love for Peter, approached the situation in the gentlest way possible. Instead of pointing out Peter's denial on that evening, instead of accusing Peter of his callous treatment of their relationship, he simply guided Peter back to that place and time with a charcoal fire and 3 questions about their relationship. After which Jesus point blankly said, "Then follow me." Words which no doubt had been burned into Peter's memory. Words which Jesus had said to him 3 years earlier. "Follow me. You belong to me, Peter. And you have a place in the great scheme of things as my shepherd." Whereas Jesus had once described himself as the good shepherd, now he was entrusting the flock to Peter. And Peter didn't have to change anything about himself. He didn't have to fill the pews or balance the budget to be a shepherd in God's kingdom. He didn't have to compete against others with a spectacular worship service, and it didn't have to take place in an eye-popping cathedral. The only requirement to be a shepherd was love. Do you love me, Peter? Then become one of my shepherds and follow me. Because you belong, Peter. There's no more denying that you belong to me. There are words that everyone longs to hear. You belong and you have a purpose in life. And yet they are the very words which are withheld from so many people today, and by the church of all places. The only conditions which Jesus placed upon Peter for serving others was love. Did Peter love Jesus? Yes. Well, then get busy, because there's a place for you in this kingdom of God's. But the church is guilty of erecting all kinds of hurdles to prevent people from feeding lambs and tending sheep. Unless you are the right gender, unless you are the right sexual orientation, unless you have received a theological degree from the right seminary, unless you meet these and any other qualifications that may exist, well, you can just forget about tending to any of God's sheep. Heck, you might even want to think about whether or not you're a member of God's flock. But Jesus said, "Do you love me? If you do, then you belong to me, and you need to get busy doing my work. Not only with the 99 already in the fold, but also the one which is out wandering around somewhere." I wonder if Peter tried to argue with Jesus about the job description. "But Jesus, I'm a fisherman. I'm not a shepherd. I don't know the first thing about feeding sheep." I tried that argument. I recently made a Facebook post that apparently surprised some folks. I mentioned that I had received a science degree with a major in microbiology. I imagined them scratching their heads trying to figure out how I went from microbiology to ministry. And it's a long story. But the bottom line is, Jesus asked, "Do you love me?" "Well, yes, Jesus, but I don't know the first thing about ministry. My background is in science. And besides, I'm an addict and alcoholic. Sure, I'm in recovery, but what if I start using again? And I've been through so many relationships, you might say that purity isn't exactly one of my strong suits. But do you love me? Because if you do, you belong to me. And I've got a job for you." My story isn't special. In fact, I'm coming to believe it's typical. God seems to choose the most unlikely of us to serve in God's kingdom. And the only requirement is a love for Jesus. If you meet that requirement, then you belong to him. And you are enlisted as a shepherd, even if the job is as foreign to you as ministry is from microbiology. as foreign as feeding lambs is from catching fish. If you've ever been told that you don't belong, then I want to say right here and now, that's a lie. And I'm sorry someone said that to you. If you've ever been told that you don't quite measure up in order to serve in God's kingdom, that's another lie. Those sorts of lies can be devastating. They are cruel, and they are painful words that no one should ever hear. Unfortunately, many people hear them over and over until they believe them. But I want to share with you the truth that I have come to receive. And the truth which the Spirit has infused into my whole being is that you and I belong and we have a purpose. We don't need to change who we are. God can use us just as we are. The only job requirement is love. Do you love me? Then tend my flock. Amen.